In the past couple of years, the world has been turned on its head, and so too has not just the car industry, but the very purpose of cars themselves. They've become more like lifestyle offerings, a safe haven as opposed to something to just commute from point A to point B in. And as far as lifestyle is concerned, very few cars do it better than this, or rather these. What we have with us here today are the 2021 BS6 compliant iterations of the Isuzu DMax. Let's take a look at what's changed. We'll be testing both the VCross and the Highlander on-road and off-road, so do stick around for that. But first, let's talk about that new engine. Now, the biggest change to the DMax lineup is of course the fact that the 1.9 litre diesel engine has now been updated to meet BS6 emission norms. Power has gone up by around 13 bhp, so the total stands at just above 160 bhp. Torque has also gone up by 10 Nm, now standing at 360 Nm. The 6-speed manual and automatic transmission options are still retained, but as you may have noticed, we got two DMaxes here with us, and that's because there is a new variant in the DMax lineup, and it is this, the Highlander. Prices start at Rs 16.98 lakh, and it is the new entry point to the DMax range. Now, the biggest visual differences to the Highlander as opposed to the VCross Prestige that we have on test is the fact that this Highlander gets halogen headlamps as opposed to the bi-LED projectors that we see on the VCross. It also gets a lot less chrome all around the car, so the mirrors and the grille, they're not chrome anymore. It also rides on smaller 17-inch rims. These are not alloys, they are steel wheels with caps on top. But if you look at the spec sheet, the Highlander is actually lighter than the VCross. It also has a higher 225 kg capacity for its deck, which means that it is a bit more utilitarian. Speaking of utilitarian, on the inside, a lot of things are missing. The screen from the VCross, that's not here anymore. There's no automatic climate control, no leather seats, very few creature comforts, but I must say that Isuzu has to be commended on the fact that they have kept safety paramount. So the Highlander, even though it's an entry-level variant, it gets ABS, it gets dual front airbags, it gets EBD, and a lot more kit. Now, Highlander aside, let's talk about the VCross. In terms of pure looks, you won't really be able to tell this BS6 iteration apart from the pre-BS6 iteration. But since the changes are mostly mechanical, let's hop in and find out what it's like to drive. So what's the 2021 Isuzu DMax like to drive? Well, the big change here is the engine, so let's talk about that first. It is fairly refined at low RPMs. At city speeds, you don't really notice it intruding too much into the cabin. Yes, there is a bit of a rumble, but it's not very intrusive, especially if you have your music playing. Now, this is also helped by the fact that there is a lot of low-down grunt on the Isuzu, so you don't really need to rev out this engine to get the most out of it. In fact, post the 2,500–3,000 RPM mark, you are really just making more noise than movement. Now let's talk about this gearbox. What we have here on the VCross Prestige is the 6-speed automatic gearbox. It works rather well in the city. The shifts don't really take too much time, and they don't have a lot of jerk associated with them. When you do need to make sudden accelerations, the kickdown can take a little bit of a second, but there's quite a lot of low-down grunt so that you're not really left hanging as much as just waiting for a little more additional power to come through. Now, talking of power at 160 bhp and torque at 360 Nm, this certainly isn't what you'd call abundant amount of power and torque, but it does a great job of moving the Isuzu along quite well. On the Highlander variant that we have on test today, we also have the 6-speed manual, which is actually quite fun to play with. It's not the slickest of gearbox, I must be honest. It reminds you of those utilitarian roots of the DMax, but that is all going with the character of the car. It is a little bit of fun to play around with a long shifter. Now, aside from that, let's talk ride quality. The VCross hasn't really had the best ride quality. Even though it can take a lot of battering, it does bounce around quite a bit, especially if you don't have a lot of load in that rear deck. Because of that, it feels a little flighty and a little skittish over bumps. However, when you do load it up, things do settle down quite a bit, and the Isuzu actually irons out bumps pretty well. Now I must also point out that one of the key differentiating factors between the Highlander and the VCross is the fact that the Highlander is only available in two-wheel drive, guys, unlike the four-wheel drive Prestige variant that we have on test here. Aside from that, the Isuzu DMax hasn't really changed too much. The interior layout is rather similar to what it was before. You do lack stuff like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Although the basics are here, there are actually quite a few USB ports, 3 on both the Highlander and the VCross, and that's enough to keep your devices charged. On this top spec variant of the VCross, you also get a power driver's seat, traction control, cruise control, as well as keyless entry and side and curtain airbags, among other features. The DMax does get a bit cumbersome to drive around town because the steering is a tad heavy and the car is really long, so the turning radius isn't really suited for those tight urban jungles. But then again, the VCross isn't really made for the urban jungle, is it? So let's take it out for a bit of off-roading and find out what it's like on the rough stuff. So while we did bash the Isuzu DMax VCross about how it handles on the road, it is here out in the off-road where it truly shines. We are here on an exceptionally rocky trail. There's plenty of big sharp boulders here, and the DMax is taking it without breaking a sweat. The ground clearance is ample enough that the underbelly doesn't get scratched, and even with these rather road-biased tires, not a wheel is spun in excess. On the VCross Prestige, you also get this switchable four-wheel drive system, so you can go from 2 high to 4 high and even 4 low. You also get hill descent control, which we've actually engaged right now as we descend down this trail, and it's handling it absolutely beautifully. Now, while all the changes to the DMax range are in fact positive, the prices aren't really what you'd call affordable. At Rs 16.98 lakh, this Highlander variant doesn't really offer too much in the way of creature comforts. And the VCross range just starts at Rs 19.98 lakh, and that's for the two-wheel drive variant. You must also factor in the fact that Isuzu owners love to customize their vehicles, adding things like roof racks, roof tents, off-road bumpers, off-road tires, the works to basically make their Isuzu their ideal lifestyle choice. And while the prices do become quite steep after those accessories, there aren't any real rivals to the DMax if you are in the market for a pickup truck. Even after a price hike of almost Rs 3 lakh across the VCross range, you still miss out on things like Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, rear AC vents, and yes, you guessed it, we all know how much you love those. But in exchange, you get a proper, rugged, go-anywhere pickup truck that you can take along for rallies, for cross-country adventures, and even drive to work every day. There's very, very few cars that can do that. Wait, 1 second. Should I repeat this full thing? Bro, it's too fucking distracting, man. यार मैं भाई कैसे करूँ इधर यार? यार क्या है भाई ये? Bro, he has a gun. You saw? Bro, should I just overtake this guy? यार भाई इतना ट्रैफिक क्या है भाई यार? And as far as it, अरे बहुत तेज पहुंच गया.